We want to welcome our viewers of the Johnson City Government Information Channel on Charter Cable Channel 192 and Comcast Cable Channel 17 to this live telecast for the March 13, 2018 Johnson City Regional Planning Commission meeting. This meeting will be rebroadcast on Friday, March 16, 2018 at 12 p.m. Go ahead and call the meeting to order. I'll ask Commissioner Weiss to start us off with the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Gracious God, we give you thanks for this community and its many citizens, and particularly for those citizens who volunteer to serve on this planning commission. We pray that your guidance would be upon our deliberations and our actions here, that they may serve the greater good of our community. We pray for wisdom and guidance as we undertake that effort. We pray all this in your most holy name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda will be approval of the agenda. I'd like to add one item at the end, and that will be approval of appointments to the steering committee for the South Side community. I have a motion for...
A motion to approve is amended.
And a second?
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Next, we'll have approval of the minutes from the January 9, 2018 meeting. Do we have any
Move to approve.
motion to approve? Second. Second. Any questions? No. All in favor for approval, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We have no unfinished business to discuss at this time, so we'll launch into new business. Our new business, the first order, will be consider of the dedication of the Poinciana Place Road as a public street. Thank you, Mr. Benad, whose name I still can't pronounce well because I don't speak French.
Thank you very much, sir. The petitioner for this particular application is Mr. Glenn Allen Shernot, the developer and property owner, Tennessee Development LLC, and the cottages at Willow Springs Reserve Homeowners Association. They request that the City of Johnson City accept the dedication of 40 feet right-of-way, Poinciana Place, that was constructed as part of these cottages at Willow Springs subdivision. At the time of construction, this was reserved as a private access easement. Over time, maintenance issues have come in, and the homeowner association intends to transfer ownership to the city. This is being presented as a street plat, which means once the planning commission approves it, it's recorded. It doesn't need to go to city commission for further action. When this particular easement was developed, it did not meet public street standards because of two main things. One, it lacked sidewalks, and it didn't have curb and gutter. However, the pavement schedule met the requirement of an alley or a lane, which includes minimum 6-inch mineral aggregate base material, 1.75-inch binder course, and 1.25 surface course. This is usually the key thing that both the engineering department and planning staff consider in whether to recommend approval of a public street or not. Because if this pavement schedule, if it's too thin, then we're taking too much of maintenance liability. That's usually the key. The Director of Public Works has reviewed this and determined that if we have the 40 feet right of way, then that makes it easy, or the city will have sufficient room in future for the construction of curb and gutter over public streets, public sidewalks in future. The only problem we have with this particular plat is that units 59, 60, 61, 62, 64, and 65 with a 40 feet right of way will not meet the minimum setback, frontage setback requirement. All of them have front-facing garages. This is in the R2C district, which requires 25 feet setback. None of these will meet that requirement. Staff will recommend that the city accept this dedication because we have public utility already within this right-of-way, namely a sewer line. We also have public light, street light, that the city has been paying for the street light, although it's within a private easement. So there are already public infrastructure within this particular private easement. The owners of lots 59 units, 59, 60, 61, 62, 64, and 65 will need to obtain variances from the Board of Zoning Appeals before the Secretary of the Planning Commission can sign the plat. So this is staff's recommendation.
Thank you. You have questions for staff?
I have one question for you, son. Are we putting the cart before the horse? I mean, are we doing this in the proper order? If they're going to need variances for all of those, should Planning Commission be looking at this first, and then it has to go to BZA? What would happen if BZA doesn't grant approval for some reason or something?
Then the plat doesn't go through. And BZA right now, one of the two will be the same situation. So if you go to BZA and say grant a variance for this, BZA will say where to what? Where is a public street? From where to where am I granting a variance? Onto the Planning Commission says, yes, we accept that this right-of-way should go down from this particular position. We accept that it should be a 40-feet right-of-way. Then BZA can make a judgment based on that 40-feet right-of-way that Planning Commission has said we're ready to accept. If the Planning Commission says, give us 50-feet right-of-way, BZA cannot change that requirement. If Planning Commission says reduce it to 30 feet, BZA cannot change that requirement. So the key thing for the Planning Commission first is to set that right-of-way width, what it's going to be, and then BZA can walk off that width.
Would a better metaphor be not cart ahead of horse, but that the horse merely escaped and we can't find it? I mean, this strikes me like there's a couple different things that concern me about. As a general rule, I think making it public infrastructure is going to make sense because the long-term maintenance of these kinds of roadways for small homeowners associations can sometimes become burdensome and they may fall to the city anyway. But when you talk about the setback issue and allowing for curb and guttering and sidewalk, the reason we have that in our subdivision code is we really aren't interested in being in that kind of capital-intensive project. We want the developers to do that. And then when you talk about the setback, would you be able to park a car? Let's imagine, which it seems somewhat unlikely that we're going to come in and do curb and gutter and sidewalk after the fact, but let's imagine we did. Would there be enough setback between that sidewalk and the garage doors that a car length, how much setback issue do we have? Is there room for cars once you move it in another 10 feet and put the sidewalk and so forth?
First, we have a front-facing, the garages are all front-facing garages, so we expect that the cars will be parked inside the garages. But we can always have situations where they're parked on the driveway. That's common. And the minimum that we have in this particular case is for lot 59, which is right here. This lot 59, 13.9 feet. We're most likely going to, if somebody were to park on the driveway, part of the car is going to be within the public right-of-way. That's going to happen.
And that's before we put curb and sidewalk.
No, after we put curb and sidewalk.
If they were to put curb and
okay.
sidewalk, because here's where now it stays. And that's my question is why not just draw this up where we just kind of agree that if we ever do sidewalks, we're not going to put them on the driveway sides and keep their driveways long? That's kind of one of the things I was getting at. So why even entertain keeping the setback on that side? If functionally it wouldn't be helpful, it is a small road, it's not intensive, and you can still walk it on the other side. And we have examples where we have variances where we just have a sidewalk on one side of the street. That would seem to be an allowable variance that wouldn't take up the homeowner's property or driveway. Is there any discussion or thought on that?
Just looking at the reality of the side, it doesn't seem very probable that we will in future have a sidewalk on this side of the street. It doesn't, just looking at the side layout. This side, yes, that is, we have a sidewalk currently on Trillium Trail, And to connect that sidewalk on Trillium Trail coming down to this lot is most likely going to be on this side where you have access to the houses. There is no access from Unit 57 and 58 onto this Ponchiana place.
Okay,
So most likely going to have sidewalk on this side.
gotcha.
What is the setback going to be on, I can't see the numbers on that, but the one that's closest to the top in that drawing?
65.
Is that
65.
Yeah,
65 is going to have 20 feet.
that's after the,
After,
Yes.
it's going to have 20 feet.
And these are all existing units.
These are all existing units, yes. These are this unit 59 to 62 are currently under construction. And I think the city engineer was okay. I think the city engineer was okay with us having 40 feet right of way on this side. We're probably reducing at this, at the T end, at the horizontal end of the T, precisely because we may, really, it's not feasible that we're going to have sidewalks on this side. But maybe his boss has a different opinion. I would defer to him. The commission wants him to speak on this.
Sure, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks, Alan.
Well, we had originally recommended a narrower right-of-way, but as it went through the system and other people had the chance to look at it, the minimum right-of-way we have for a cul-de-sac street is 40 feet. And this wasn't really designed for that situation. It was really set up to be a private alley. That's why it has no curb. And an alley can have 15 feet of right-of-way. So that would fit real well. But, of course, they exceeded the minimum of 11 feet of pavement for an alley because they wanted a little wider space. And they put in approximately 20 feet of asphalt. So it's a wide alley. The feeling was, well, if we just got an extra couple of feet outside the pavement, that would put the pavement in a right-of-way, and it would still leave room between the doors and the right-of-way. I don't know if it leaves 25, but it would leave them more space. And that didn't really gel as it went through people with authority that would look at it and see other things that some of the lower-level staff didn't think about. So 40 feet is what's being recommended to you instead of something narrower.
Okay.
It's a little bit messy to have to go get variances after the fact, but if that's what is recommended, I think it's okay. I support his comment that you need a line drawn to set the variance to. So this approval of the 40-foot sets that mark. Now they know where they're actually measuring the variance from. So the T part, or the top part of the cul-de-sac, we might not need a full 40 feet on that. It's not likely we would run a piece of sidewalk across there anyway. Most cul-de-sacs we don't have a requirement for sidewalk to go around a round cul-de-sac. It stops at the bulb. The only sidewalk connection would be from the T up. I see that you could put the sidewalk across the road. It's just that you would walk across the road to get on the sidewalk. I don't know that on this low volume cul-de-sac would be a big issue of safety. So we could put the sidewalk across the road and not put it on the side where the garage doors are, except you just realize you're having the neighborhood walk across to get on it. Everybody on the T would have to walk across anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we could put the sidewalk on that, which would be the east side, the left-hand side of the street, if we want to put a sidewalk in someday.
So there are not specific plans to install sidewalks?
No.
This is just in theory at some time?
There could be a time come where those residents want sidewalk, and we would have the room to build it. And it wouldn't be necessarily something we would put a priority on at all. I think there's even a recommendation in your packet that we put a note on the plat that says we're not committing to doing that.
Yep.
But if the neighborhood starts asking for it, at least we would have the space to do it for them.
When we talk about the street being constructed to our standards, have we done core samples to be sure that that's actually the case?
Yes, we didn't need to do core samples on this one. We have done that on streets in the past that we didn't inspect during construction, but we inspected this street. We've checked with the inspector, looked at his records. The plans called for that thickness to be to our standard. He witnessed that, and it was built to our standards.
And so if the planning commission approves this, we're relying on 4 or 5 different parcels to get their variance. How long do they have to get their variance before our approval expires, for lack of a better word? I mean, could we approve this in 20 years from now, the last variance is getting sought? I mean, we laugh, but.
Yeah.
Right. Except otherwise, I would think usually if we require that the property owner has to request the variance, or at least send a representative to do so, sign off on the application. And sometimes the variance application fee scares the property owner if they really don't want to do it. So the developer or the homeowner association that is maintaining this, is spending the money maintaining it, it's basically a cost-benefit thing. Do we pay for it and get a variance done, or do we take these maintenance costs? So often they will go ahead and pay for it and get a variances done.
They being the association.
The association.
In their mad rush to get out of the
To
responsibility.
get out of the
Responsibility.
responsibility.
Yes, okay.
So most likely I see the association doing that to get out of it.
So-
The Board of Zoning Appeals will meet first Tuesday in April. So if we approve it today, if I get this information out to them tomorrow, and they're okay to go ahead with the variance, then this will be on the Board of Zoning Appeals agenda for April, first Tuesday of April.
Are all 3 of those upper houses occupied, owned by owners?
And if 63, 64, and 65 are owned, yes, they are currently owned. These ones that are under construction.
Yeah, I knew that, but I didn't know
Somebody.
how many owners we were talking about.
63 will not require a variance. It has more than 25
Good point.
feet.
Yeah.
So just 64
Forward.
and 65 will
Okay.
require a variance.
Are any of the homeowners here this evening? Or has the city heard from any of the homeowners, or do we have any idea how they feel about? I mean,
I don't have any of the applicants
can the
here today.
homeowners
I don't-
association request a variance on their behalf if they were opposed to it?
They own the common property around it. I'm not sure.
Well,
It's kind of
they-
a shared thing.
It
They all own
depends. They may own the common property and they may not. It just depends on how the document's written.
We had to review that document. Mr. Epps wanted to be sure that the homeowner association's asking for this. We had to be sure they own this land that they're dedicating, because only the owner can dedicate it. At first, it looked like the original developer still owned the land. They've presented a document which we've gone over and made sure that the description of the land around these units, it describes in that document, matches the document, and they do own it. We've verified that.
So so does the HOA then need one variance since they're one entity with ownership of all of that? Or are they going to have to come in and make application for 5 separate variances?
They will be obtaining 5 separate variances because each of these units have different setbacks they will be requesting in
Okay.
terms of the number of setbacks. But one applicant will just be the HOA requesting those 5 different variances.
5 variances, but 1 application from the HOA.
They can do that. You can have 5 different variants. One applicant, HOA, 5 different variances.
So 5 applications.
5 applications.
5
Yes.
applications and
But
5 fees, okay.
one requester.
1 requester.
One last note on the history. I guess this goes back almost 2 years ago, when the homeowners association first approached us to take it over. We did a study, we looked at the records we had at the time, measured things to see what was missing, made a report. It got stuck. It didn't go forward from there because of the ownership issue. They had to go get some legal help, and finally that was resolved, who actually owned it, and then it's back to us. So they're driving it, and they're asking for it. They know about it. That's the homeowner association.
All right. Any more questions for staff? Seeing none, we'll open up public comment. Anyone wishing to speak for or against the adoption of this street, please stand. And I don't see anyone, so we will open it back up for discussion on the commission now. Any discussions, comments, motions? A motion to approve from Commissioner Liu. Any other motions or discussion?
Well, I guess we have to have confidence in the fact that the document's been examined and the HOA owns that property, so if that's what they're asking for.
Is that a second?
Well, I guess it is.
It's a half. It's a one and a half.
It's kind of
I think,
wishy-washy.
I'm not so
We
sure
want to be
about
clear
this one.
to accept, I guess, let me state this to make sure I have it correct, as approved, looking for, as presented, with variances for the BZA for units 59, 60, 61, 62, and 65, and with the addition of a note on the plat stating that Johnson City makes no commitment to the construction of curb and gutter, sidewalks, or other improvements to the street to meet public street standards within any specified time. So we're going to put that note on there too, correct? Does that meet with your
Do we need with
motions
any
and second?
specified time? Because that implies at some point.
It's kind of actually just poor wordsmanship to have to say specified time. If we just say, we don't,
We don't make any commitment to do that,
Make no
Period.
commitment.
period.
okay, we'll put the period after the end of the word standards. I like it.
Now, are we discussing?
We are discussing the motions on the floor. Anybody?
I have reservations about approving this.
Okay.
Because I can think of a number of HOAs in Johnson City that are confronted with similar situations where they would love nothing more than to get the city to assume responsibility for some of that right-of-way or access. And while I'm sympathetic to the need and recognize probably in the long term, there's a very high likelihood that at some point there'll be enough pressure that the municipality will assume responsibility. But in other site subdivision plans that we review and plats that come before us and we approve, we tell everybody, here's the rules of the game. If you're going to build in our community and you're going to build to our standard and our standard is this and it includes sidewalks, and there are developers who are doing that all over town consistently. Now, admittedly, that's not who's asking for this now, but we set up a scenario where a developer who might be inclined to play a short game with the idea of, I'm going to get out of here before the consequences of every little cheat I pull undetected, and I'm not suggesting this was a cheat, but this doesn't rise to the standard of a
This is
city
not what our
street.
subdivision
This is
standard
not
is,
what we
and it's being
envisioned.
currently built
Then
right now.
perhaps-
It's
Exactly.
not like it's being grandfathered in from 20 years ago.
Right,
Our
and based on
subdivision
that, why
recommendations are very
wouldn't we
clear.
be more likely to go with the option that we request the road be improved to meet the standards, including the construction of the curb and gutter and sidewalks? Let the developer or the homeowners association assume those costs, and then the city would take over ownership of it.
Well, then it would meet our standards.
Right.
That wouldn't be nearly as much of an issue. That'd be like any other subdivision at that point.
Right, which I think we want to aim toward it being like any other subdivision, so
Right.
that it doesn't seem like you are to live up to our standards unless somebody didn't, in which case we'll probably grant you a mulligan and you get in for free. It's
an excellent
And I don't know, I mean, that's, I have reservations about it. I'm sympathetic to the homeowners association's position, but
Okay.
I think, to Dr. Wild's point, that would be more palatable to me because it would be treating this requester the same way we would treat any number of other developers. You know, Waterbrook didn't get built without sidewalks and then come in and ask to be exempted and given some special carve-out. Hunter's Lake didn't get built that way. And there are a lot of other communities in Johnson City that have issues like this, that we might be going down a path of adopting a lot more roads than we want.
A lot of wisdom in that. I think that's an excellent point.
And if not wisdom, there's just a lot of words.
I would like to withdraw my motion.
Okay, we have a withdrawal of the motion on the floor. So we are still entertaining discussion or looking for new motions, which could include denial the request.
A question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is the,
This is for question
is
for
the
staff.
easement recognized as 40 feet right now? Or is that a standard that you all set for this request?
The way it's written right now, it doesn't really specify 40 feet. Basically, the homeowner association owns anything else. This was really not constructed as a standard subdivision where, each property owner owns a lot on its own. This is more like a PUD kind of construction.
I live in one, so I know
Yeah.
about that.
So the homeowner association owns every other thing outside of your building, kind of scenario.
So we don't have an approved or accepted easement width in there? We just know we have an easement?
Well, I think she's just saying, in our ordinances, what if they were to build this to the city standards, the street to city standards, what would the easement have been in that situation?
If we treated this as a lane, which really that is what it would have been, this would not have qualified as an alley, because alleys are really kind of small parts behind buildings, by definition in the code. This really would not have met the definition of an alley. It says here, a street set aside primarily for vehicular access to the site or rear of properties, otherwise abutting a street. So this really would not have met the definition of an alley. We would have treated it as a lane, which would have been 40 feet right of way.
So 40
We have
feet.
a little history there.
Great.
When they first came to meet with us, almost 2 years ago, that's what we told them, that they would have to bring it up to standard, because they were asking for it to be a street. And some of us that were involved in it very early didn't even think of it in terms of an alley. We thought of it as it's 20 feet wide of pavement, it's missing some things, and it ought to have those things added. And that was our recommendation. Other people got involved, and the group got bigger that was considering, more ideas came in, and someone says, hey, it might qualify as an alley. Alleys don't have curbs. It exceeds those minimums of an alley, except no one discussed what he just mentioned, where the access is, rear or whatever. So the ball starts rolling, hey, we may be able to take this without any big issues if we consider it an alley. And that's when they went off to find out if they owned it. When it came back, it switched back to a street situation. So there might actually be a fourth option that's not presented to you, is to accept it as an alley. The trouble with that is we don't name alleys. If you think of the alleys in Park Place subdivision, they don't have curbs and they're narrower, but they're in the backs, but they don't have names. This has a name and they probably want to keep it. Well, they all front on other public streets, so their addresses can come from those other streets. But you'd like to be able to tell someone, come in, turn on this street name. So that's why the alley is probably kind of fading off and it's coming back to the street situation. But to wrap it up, the staff did tell them in a report that we recommended that before the city take it, that it have those things added.
Alan, when you say they, has it always been a homeowners association?
Yes, it's been a group of their executive board.
Okay.
About 4 people have been with
Not
us.
necessarily the developer, but the HOA.
It's always been the HOA. The developer got out of it some years ago.
He was the guy from Greenville, wasn't he?
Yes.
Okay.
Lyndon Gallimore
Gallimore.
was the original developer, and he sold off property he hadn't developed. I think Terry Orth's bought most of it, and then the big church, big property was bought by a church on the right going in.
Thank you, Alan. So we're.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Song, would it be helpful for us to defer action on this until next month's meeting to go back? I mean, it would be helpful to be hearing from the people who are making this ask. It would, I think, also be helpful perhaps for them to understand what the costs and considerations of bringing it up to standard are. I'm just concerned about the message we send to the developers who follow the protocol as we spell it out, but I don't want to do something willy-nilly, if you will, tonight if we can
Deferring.
defer it to the April meeting. This isn't something that, 30 days is not going to make a difference on this kind of request, it seems to me.
I think that would be a fair option. I can present it to the applicant. So this is the concern that the Planning Commission has. Sometimes the applicant will just withdraw it, go and bring the streets up to public street standards, and then apply. Sometimes you have that. Other times they'll say, well, we want to go back and make a case. So they are not here today. I think it would be a fair option to say, defer this. I will present it to the homeowner association or the concerns of the Planning Commission, which I think are very valid concerns.
So can you take us back to the slide before this that shows the footprint? Would we be, as a city, would we accept it if we ran sidewalk down the road parallel to Willow Springs, bring it to the T, and then curb and gutter the whole thing? Would that, if a developer had come in with a plan to do just sidewalk down to the T, curb and gutter, would that have been acceptable?
Yes, if the sidewalk just came down to the T, we would have
Okay.
accepted it.
And how many linear feet of sidewalk would that be?
That would have been, package, the full detail is in the package.
I can see it, but I can't read it.
That would have been 89 plus C4, then 38.5 plus L4, that's L4, yeah, plus L4, 37.89. That is
Is the whole thing 165?
the length coming from Trillium Tray right down to the horizontal.
Okay.
That's what that would have been the length.
Just for my point in discussion, I appreciate your point is that variances are useful when there's a strong reason why we have made the variance. When the reason for the variance is, well, we just didn't build it that way, that does create a Pandora's box of problems, and it shows maybe our standards really aren't what they being considered universal like they should be, and that could look like favorites or just willy-nilly, as you say. So I think it's an excellent point. I think there's nothing saying we have to know something about this tonight. We can certainly defer and discuss it further. I think it'd be tough to turn it into an alley whenever it looks like this. It's like Alan said. So there may not be a really good way out of this. Those are my thoughts, but.
Well, there are ways out of this. It stays a private drive.
Yes, I mean,
And
right.
it has a name. It gets named an alley, and then it loses its name.
Mm-hmm.
It gets brought up to the standards that it could have been built at. And, what we're talking about, I'm not going to start, but I mean, we've poured some sidewalks before, and I mean, that's not, the number to put the sidewalk and the curb and guttering is not one that 7 people looking to get out of the road maintenance business for their HOA might not find a sufficient benefit to their investment. And, oh yeah, by the way, they get a sidewalk, everything around them looks nicer. I just would rather, let's not pie in the sky waiting for tomorrow, maybe someday somebody will get curb and guttering. If it's a city street, our standard are these things, and we'll
And
gladly
if we would have
facilitate.
accepted it at City Street with the way we were proposing it, and it could be
Let
done.
it be the HOA decision.
And in addition to that, if a developer came in today and wanted to build a private street, our subdivision regulations require that the private street will have to be built to public street standard.
Oh, so there would really be no incentive
There is
in
no,
that scenario?
yes, if a developer came in today, we will hold you to that same standard.
Absolutely. And I guess if we were to handle it at that point, and they do build it to a point where you would accept it, I mean, maybe they don't need the setback on the house side of the street on either place, we could decrease the setback and therefore the risk.
So how
to
about
the-
a motion to put this on the table until the April meeting to give staff time to talk to the applicant, having heard our comments?
Great.
And
So we have a motion to defer. Do we have a
Second.
second, and do we have any further discussion on the deferral? No, please call the roll.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Sanders?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Commissioner Wiles?
Yes.
Chairman Blount?
Yes.
Approval to defer to the April meeting.
All right, so we'll move on to our next item on new business, which is to consider a request to grant an access across the 5-foot control strip at the end of Mallard Street.
Mr. William Norris, who owns this piece of property off of Mallard Street, is requesting that the Planning Commission grant him access across the 5-foot control strip that exists at the end of this particular street. This 5-foot control strip was dedicated as part of this particular subdivision. And as stated here, it says 5-foot control strip dedicated to Johnson City Regional Planning Commission. That basically means before anybody can cross that street, do anything, construct a driveway or construct a street, from that point onward, you need to come to the Planning Commission and get approval or have the Planning Commission do away with the 5-foot control strip. He is not requesting that the Commission abandon the 5-foot control strip. He thinks that sometime in future, he may want to subdivide this property and create 2 lots. I also brought this to his attention that there is a sector adjoining this piece of property, and for purposes of maintenance or ownership, there is a footpath from the end of Mallard Street going up to this sector. So if the Planning Commission were to abandon it, he can go up tomorrow, block that access, and we'll be denying the owners of the sector any kind of footpath access around there. To be fair to both property owners, it will be important that he only gets, he has the access, but the Planning Commission maintains ownership of the 5-foot control strip. He wants to build a single-family house. That particular zoning district permits what he wants to do. Staff recommendation will be that Commission grant him this 5-foot, this access, maintain ownership of the 5-foot control strip, grant him access to it, and just as we did for Jessica Way, it will be important that he has a note on the plat stating that if for any reason the city goes out there and we're doing work, maybe controlling stormwater or anybody, and you happen to destroy, the edge of the driveway he has put in, it is not the responsibility of the city. Or if some other developer goes out there in future and construct a street that requires that a driveway be realigned for some reason whatsoever, it will not be the responsibility of the city. That will not be any liability on the city or on that developer to align the driveway. It will be totally on him. That's the same thing we did for Jessica's Way.
Thank you, Hassan. Do we have any questions for staff?
How does the owner currently access his property?
The 10.85 acres,
Yes.
currently there is no principal structure of the property, probably just walks off Mallard Street. However, this 25.09 acres is part of this 10.8 acres. They're all one piece of property. So I see a driveway going off Timberlake Road coming down to this house down here. So it would seem that maybe he also access the property from here. A lot of woods here. I'm not so sure he uses that because of the wood. So it would seem that he currently just walks into the property from Mallard Street.
And just so I'm clear, the 6.35 acres above it, it would be relying on that same, not that parcel, but if you kind of move up to about the 11
Where
o'clock
the house
position,
is.
about where the house is sitting.
That uses the footpath.
Yeah, go up toward Mallard, go to where the control strip is. Now go north ever so slightly, there, right above that arrow, the house.
This one.
Yes. I wish we had those little red laser pointers
Yeah,
that used
they
to
just
be
don't
up
work
here.
on the screen. I brought one. It didn't show up.
So we would be maintaining the ownership of the 5-foot control strip so that we don't have to fix if we've had to break it for some maintenance reason. But what was the implication of the 5-foot control strip for the 6.35 acres?
6.35
There's a
acres.
footpath, and he uses the footpath.
So
to
that guy
access.
gets in and out.
He gets in and
But he's
out.
walking on the other person's property to do that. Does he have an easement?
I have no idea.
So why does, well, so I guess I'm curious, why would our 5-foot control strip have any, I mean, what would the implications of us not having that or having that be on this guy who's walking across it?
I'm guessing that's if this guy does subdivide this land, or it turns into a subdivision with a different character, and then maybe even something changes with the 6.35, that this looks more like a subdivision or some, basically, you said there is a potential that's maybe subdivided or changed.
Yes, he is looking at a possibility of subdividing this piece
For
of
the, for
property.
the two houses?
This,
His property line goes right through that guy's house according to the blue square.
Yeah, I know. That's it. And the blue square walks on his property.
right now, he intends to build a house and a barn. What he thinks that he can do in future is to cut this piece of property into 2 lots, subdivide this, and build a house for, I think it's a mother-in-law. Take down this barn here and build another house here. Now, it's very possible that people use deeds and snake this thing through without doing an actual subdivision plan, bringing to the city for us to look at it. But when you have a 5-foot control strip reserve, if he snakes this through for any reason whatsoever and any construction begins out there, code enforcement will put a stop work order to it very easily because he will have an access problem. He will have an access problem. If he comes in to subdivide this piece of property, we will require that each of the lots has to meet the required street frontage. And right now, we only have 50 feet at the end of this Mallard Street. That's all we have. So he will have to create 25 feet. That can work. So this basically creates a situation where subdivision is impossible without extension of that street.
Even giving him giving him the access, we really aren't giving up the leverage
No.
associated with the control.
With the control. Yeah. We maintain that leverage.
Because these stubs are in here to encourage interconnectivity, and I guess I just don't want to walk away from that entirely. It doesn't sound like, in your assessment, we are.
No,
We're just
no,
letting him
no.
cross it to
We
build his
just-
house and barn.
Yes. If in future, the planning commission, some of that, let's say a developer comes in, buys this huge piece of property and says, or maybe even here, buys some property around here, subdivides it and say, I want to extend this street in there to create 5, 6 lots, planning commission will say, go ahead, we own that 5-foot control strip.
But we wouldn't have,
But we wouldn't have
we
property.
wouldn't let him go across to somebody else's land. He'd have to buy the guy's land.
Yeah, to put a street on.
So I think the planning commission is maintaining leverage and not giving up its rights at this particular time.
Okay. Any further questions for staff regarding the control strip? No. Okay, thank you. We'll go ahead and open it up to public comment regarding this access request. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and open it back up to discussion and motions on the commission.
I move that we grant the request for granting access across the 5-foot control strip at the end of Mallard Street for proposed single-family residential development.
We have one motion for approval. We have a second from Commissioner Liu. Do we have any further discussion or question? Seeing none, please call the roll. Call the roll.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Steves?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Chairman Zines?
Yes.
Approved.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and move to number 3, the Washington County zoning resolution text amendment regarding accessory buildings. Hello, Ms.
Hello,
Angie.
thank you.
Thank you for coming.
This request is to amend the A1 district in the Washington County zoning resolution. And again, our zoning resolution is separate from the city's zoning ordinance and from Jonesboro's as well. So this amendment would provide for residents that are in the rural areas of our county. And the request is to allow accessory structures in the A1 district in some instances as a principal use. And that would allow for homeowners, property owners to take advantage of tracts of land they may own, to put a structure on it, to keep equipment, to maintain the land. So additionally, with this amendment, we are recommending an amendment to our definition section, and that would keep the definition of the accessory structures consistent with the amendment we're proposing in the A1 district. Our Washington County Planning Commission reviewed this last week and recommended approval. The Jonesboro Planning Commission will meet next week to consider these amendments. And your recommendation tonight will be sent to the Washington County Commission, who meets at the end of the month. May I answer any questions?
Just for clarification, this comes
sir.
to us because it would apply to unincorporated areas within our 1101 growth boundaries that might theoretically someday become part of Johnson
That-
City. It has no bearing on currently incorporated.
That's correct. It is a state requirement that the planning commissions for the municipalities within the area make recommendations back.
Thank you.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Charles,
Thank
appreciate
you.
that. Any questions for her? No? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and open up for public comment. Does anybody here wish to discuss these zoning resolution text amendments? And seeing none, we will go ahead and close public comment and open it up for discussion and resolutions, or motions.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve from Commissioner Sandos,
Second.
and a second from Commissioner Clark. Sorry, in a moment. All right, any
Lowe?
discussion? I don't perceive any, so please call the roll. Yes, go. I'm making sure everybody has a chance for discussion now, okay?
okay.
That's my plan.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Sandos? Yes. Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
Chairman Zion?
Yes.
Okay, approved.
Thank you. Next. Item number 4 is consider text amendment to the Johnson City zoning ordinance on membership requirements for the Historic Zoning Commission.
Yes. In an effort to fill a position currently on the Historic Zoning Commission, it was realized that Article 6.26.4, the creation of a Historic Zoning Commission, requires that any member who serves on the commission shall live in the city of Johnson City for no less than 3 years immediately prior to the appointment to the Historic Zoning Commission. It has been asked by the City Commission to remove that language to allow any citizen of Johnson City to be able to serve on the Historic Zoning Commission. The Historic Zoning Commission at their February 27th meeting heard this request and crafted wording based off the certified local government guidelines provided to us by the state of Tennessee, and they have removed that 3-year length of residency requirement to be a Historic Zoning Commissioner, and have changed the paragraph to read it as such. A Historic Zoning Commission is hereby created for the City of Johnson City, Tennessee, consisting of 7 members who shall have demonstrated interest, experience, or knowledge in historic preservation, and are residents of Johnson City at the time of their appointment, and who shall continue to be so eligible as long as they serve. This recommendation was unanimously approved by the Historic Zoning Commission, and staff is recommending approval of this based off the Historic Zoning Commission's recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Young. And we want to recognize you for your service. We know you're leaving shortly, and thank you very much for all your work for the city. It's been great working with you.
Thanks for all the experience,
Snaps
guys.
for Matt.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Any questions for staff regarding the text amendment?
I'll wait till Matt's fully away from the podium. I'm kidding, I don't have any questions.
We want you hiking, we want you in shape. All right, we'll open up for public comment, and I suspect there will be none. In that case, we will go ahead and close public comment and open up for discussion and motions.
I think the chairman of the Historic Zoning Commission is here.
Oh, would you like to comment regarding this?
Yeah.
I didn't know if you were spectating or not. I didn't.
Well,
In the case we're open, go ahead.
I can spectate or I can pontificate, whichever you would like.
We do a lot.
No, as Matt pointed out, I mean, as you recall, this did come before you previously, and that was rejected, that motion was rejected by the city commission. I did have a discussion with one of the commissioners who voted against it on this. And of course, one of their arguments is that no other commissions have any requirements at all, other than being a resident of Johnson City. That being said, as I pointed out to the commissioner, historic zoning operates under a little different rules and regulations, because Johnson City is a certified local government. That is a process that you go through with the Tennessee Historic Commission that is then sent to the National Park Service for final certification. So it's basically kind of a national designation. It's not just, you're abiding by all the rules and normal regulations that we have to deal with. As Matt pointed out, this wording is straight out of a document that is provided to us by the Tennessee Historic Commission called Guidelines for Certified Local Government Program. And the main sentence in there, where it says, members who shall have a demonstrated interest, experience, or knowledge of historic preservation, is straight out, a direct copy out of that document that they state as, this is what members of Historic Zoning Commission should have. So that's where we are.
Sounded very reasonable. Thank you. Appreciate it. Questions? No?
Thank you. I think that's helpful. As one of the commissioners who did not vote
Right, I understand that, Mr.
the
Wise.
earlier change, because I like to get along, and it seemed reasonably good. It's close enough. I think this is better because it does align with that document, and at the same time recognizes that really when it comes to appointments, it's not the language of the code that ensures the quality of the appointment, it's the quality of the applicant and the quality of the people making the appointment.
Pointers.
And so that very much matters, and I think in this particular instance, what really brought the issue to light was we had one particular applicant who stood out in the pool.
Exactly.
And they were ineligible under our old rules. And the earlier change would have accommodated that. This, I think, just makes it more consistent across the various boards that we appoint to.
And that candidate is still very interested.
Yes, and I think and we remain interested in the
He called me
candidate.
yesterday wanting to know what was going on.
Right. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Do we need a
sir.
public hearing on this, or do we need a motion to approve it?
Well, let's just do it, because there's a lot of people here who want to talk about it. and
I
wanna
was
make sure
sensing
yeah.
that, yeah.
So we will open the public hearing to make sure we don't miss anything, and seeing no one else standing, summarily close it. So, so please, I'm open for discussion and/or motions regarding this amendment.
At one time, there was discussion about a residency requirement of some time. Does anybody still feel like that is necessary or appropriate if a candidate comes to Johnson City and they have either demonstrated interest, experience, or knowledge?
I'll speak for me. I don't think that's, should be a requirement. Anyone else?
And the language that we had previously approved that had subsequently been not approved made it basically an either-or, so that the residency requirement wasn't binding. A candidate could still have been selected without having met that 3-year period or 1-year period, as the language had previously stated. It still requires the demonstrated interest, the experience, the knowledge. So it still is dependent upon the criteria and the qualifications of the applicant and then the selectors.
So are there enough applicants in Johnson City for this commission typically that will meet this criteria without making it an even/or anymore?
It still depends on, just because somebody applies doesn't mean somebody has to be selected. It still goes up, ultimately becomes the decision of those that are in the position for the appointments.
And I would say, having seen the applications for appointments, more often than not, we get more applications that are of a quality that you really find their application appealing. Like, we have to cull through and delay acting on people that, it'd be very good, but there's 5 people in for 3 spots. And so that's thankfully, and that's a good thing for Johnson City, more often than not, the candidate pool is bigger than the eligible spots.
Okay.
I think I was getting where your question was.
Yeah, I just
which is,
didn't
do we
wanna
want to put
make
a
it-
length of residence? If we have a large number of people applying that you'd like to have an additional
No,
hurdle?
no, I
Okay.
didn't want an additional. I didn't want us to get into the position where we've screened out all of the applicants. And so if you left it as an even or.
I think all you have to do is say,
perhaps-
do you have an interest, a demonstrated interest? Yes, I do. I have applied.
Yeah, I guess that, and that's true.
The language, I was going to say, because it doesn't and or, all three criteria doesn't have to be met.
Gotcha.
It still becomes very
an or.
abstract.
Subjective.
Right.
Very subjective.
Okay.
Any further discussion or motions?
Motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? I'm doing good with this. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Sandos?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
Chairman Zilens?
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right, next to last. The number 5 item on the agenda is to consider a text amendment to the Johnson City Regional Planning Commission subdivision regulations on stormwater management plan for minor subdivisions in the 100-year flow path and major subdivision construction plans. Hey, Song.
Thank you very much, sir. In January, the Planning Commission decided to schedule this public hearing today to make this amendment in the subdivision regulations. Basically, 2 amendments. First, with respect to the requirement for stormwater construction plans for minor subdivisions, and requirement for a 100-year flow path to be shown on the construction plans for major subdivisions. This revision on minor subdivision plans is necessary because our subdivision regulations define a minor subdivision as the division of a tract or parcel of land which does not involve new street, utility, or drainage construction. But we have the required submitters for minor subdivision plans requiring a stormwater management plan, which will contradict our definition, because in the definition we don't require drainage construction. So this particular amendment will do away with item 3 under section 3.3.2, which is a stormwater management plan. We'll eliminate that. And then the construction plans requirement, I want to make sure that the commissioners have this particular copy. The 2 bullet points there, those are the 2 elements we will be adding to the construction plans. The as-built already require that the 100-year flow path be shown, but then in the construction plan, we don't require that. And that creates a problem for the surveyor, who has to use the 100-year flow path shown on the construction plans in order to do the as-built. In this particular document you have, with the as-built element, the yellow on the line, I wish to leave that out today. The reason being that when we made the public, the notice in the newspaper for this particular hearing, we only, and scheduling the meeting in January, we only mentioned stormwater management plan and construction plans. We did not mention as-built. So we may have a legal problem if we add something today that was not included in the newspaper publication for the public hearing.
Do we want to defer this for you to have a chance for notice on that and then just handle it all as a single compact unit next time?
That's an alternative. I can add all of this. If Alan is okay with that, we can go back and re-advertise this, include all the 3, or the commission can approve these 2, and then we do the as-built on a later date.
What would staff's preference be between those 2 scenarios?
I would prefer that we approve it today. Reason being that we have subdivision plats that are kind of waiting out there, and I would like to use this approval today to move those.
And the 3rd item would get noticed in the next week or 2, and we would see it in April?
In April, yes, sir.
Okay. You think that's...
Are you sure? That was very half-hearted.
Well, it doesn't appeal to my sense of neatness. I like it.
Like a nice, neat little.
My guess is that the as-built issue not being included now will not affect the quality of your approvals or lack thereof, or the process of how you're dealing with what's going on right now in any
No,
meaningful
no,
way?
it
Okay.
will not affect that. We already have the as-built element requiring the one radial flow path, all of that in the subdivision regs now.
It's just going to make it less
Just
burdensome in the future?
clean the language, if we can put
Okay,
it that.
it's a minor technicality, but not a significant material benefit. Okay, I understand now. Any further questions for staff? I don't see any. Okay.
Those are minor technicalities in the eye of who you're inconveniencing.
Well, that's very true. That's why, that's why I like the neat, clean.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess we can open up, we will go ahead and open up public comment. And is anybody here wishing to speak for or against this text amendment? As clear as it is. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and open it up for discussion. And to be clear, we are looking at 2 changes to the text amendment of the Johnson City Regional Planning Commission subdivision regulations on stormwater management. 1 change will be to strike item number 3 on section 3-3.2. We will strike the section that would require a stormwater management plan, and we would apply an appendix to construction plans, which would include a construction plans review checklist as visualized on this document. And so that is the motion or the request by staff. We're looking for motions to approve it in that way.
Are you looking at me?
I like when you make motions. I'll look over to the right.
So moved.
I have a motion. I have a second from Mr. Lewis. Both sides, it's like bookends. Okay. Any further discussion?
Far away, that's what.
I'm not hearing any discussion. So please call the roll.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yes.
Commissioner Sandos?
Yes.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Commissioner Wild?
Yes.
Chairman Zayons?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Motion approved. The last item on the agenda that we added at the beginning would be to appoint members from this body to the Southside Steering Committee. The Southside neighborhood planning process has been moving along quite nicely. We've got some information on that as a commission tonight. I want to thank Mr. Manley for his work on that. Great job, nice detail, and I'm glad the community is involved. But we do want to have planning commission representation on the steering committee to help make sure our goals are met and to integrate that information from and to the body. So I have been made aware that Commissioner Wild and Commissioner Liu would be willing to serve on this, and if that is indeed the case, it would be my motion to approve, to appoint them. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second, and any discussion? See none. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Very good. Thank you very much for serving, and we will call the meeting to adjourn. Thank you.